Hearing that without it being in 16-bit just sounds wrong, doesn't it? Either way, with very little fanfare, hello everyone and welcome to Let's Play Shinobi! It's a one-parter because this game isn't very long. It wasn't long in arcades to begin with, only about 15 minutes long, but here we are at about 26. Alright, before I go into probably looking the manual for whatever this game has for a storyline, basic controls, one button I believe is firing a shuriken forward, or if you're close up to an enemy, hitting them with whatever your close range weapon is. A is jump, or button 2 is jump, then I think it's like up in button 2 and down in button to allow you to jump between the upper and lower layer of whatever level there is. Most levels have 2 or more layers, and throughout them you not only need to navigate to reach the end of the pathway, in the case it's a non-linear stage, or at least a less linear stage, but you also want to navigate between them in order to find children. Children will either increase your life total like that one just did, change your weapon type, and upgrade it by and large, give you points, or things of that general nature. Every stage is built up about 2 to 3 sections before the boss fight, which we'll get to that when the time comes. Some will also give you access to the bonus stage that I only successfully do once, because the bonus stages in this game, how do I put this, suck. Now I should note, the children, I think they're actually called hostages, are completely optional to nab, at least in the Master System version. In the arcade version, I think some of the other home console versions, which there are numerous differences between, they are required, but in this version, not so much. Now, before I go into more mechanics, let's talk about the bonus stage. We got 2 layers here with ninjas running across it. Press the B button, /button 1 to throw a shuriken. Hopefully kill them before they reach you, otherwise you're done. You get points no matter how far you get into this minigame, but if you clear the minigame, which takes a while, and is also absurdly hard because of how fast the ninjas are, you will get a ninjutsu. The ninjutsu in this game are more or less just screen nukes. It'll wipe out any enemies on the screen. You do it by holding the, I think the 1 and 2 button together. Also, hi Marilyn Monroe. They didn't have the license to use that, so in certain versions of this game, that image is just outright replaced. Similar with that enemy on the top of the screen who was very reminiscent of Spider-Man. I believe their graphics were changed in certain other versions, though I think Sega ended up getting the license back in time for a certain later game. More on that later, because that was a weird moment in that particular game. Now, the Master System version did just outright add some mechanics to the game from the arcade release. For instance, the health gauge was just not a thing in the original game. It was one of those one hit and you're dead kind of arcade games, my favorite. Not to say we don't have a couple of those in this little Shinobi marathon we're going to be doing here, because I'm basically doing all the games before the 3D PS2 action game. But for this game, thankfully, we have a health gauge. I think by and large, all the home computer releases of this game were the same as this, or closer to the arcade version. For instance, I think the PC Engine version, which I think is the Turbo Graphics, had no close range attacks whatsoever. But I think they did also remove the time limit from the arcade version there. Either way, time for the first boss, Keno. This giant samurai can only be hit in his face, and his only attack is to shoot 2 fireballs that have surprisingly good homing into you. My best advice, stay far away and jump to bait the fireballs upwards, and then walk under them when they get too close to you. Thankfully, none of the bosses in this game have too much HP, so you'll take them down pretty quickly. With that said, this is a case where you should definitely rescue every hostage you can along the way, because otherwise you're going to be taking a lot of super quick damage. I know for a fact there is an NES version of this game, but it's, I think, a bootleg that's completely unlicensed. That is by and large based off this version, but I think not only did they remove all of the close range weapons and one of the long range weapons, I think they also changed how many shurikens you could fire at a time to 1, basically limiting your offense tremendously, because I think in this version you can have, I think, 3 of your shurikens on screen at a time, maybe? That sounds about right. I might be thinking of one of the later games, honestly. But I think to compensate for that, they changed some level design to make it a bit simpler, and I think they increased the amount of ninjutsu you could have at a time. And otherwise, I think this game got ports on the Sonic Genesis Collection and I think Virtual Console. Also, here are the grenades. The grenades are honestly one of my favorite weapons in the game, as while their bounces are a little awkward to work with, the long range alone just is super good with them. Plus, I think the further versions of long range weapons, I think they each get increases in damage the further along the chain you get. Sort of. The way the weapon upgrade system works in this game is weird. Sometimes it feels like things progress in a linear fashion, where if you get a short range upgrade here, it'll be the next thing up, culminating in basically like a chain whip. Whereas I feel like at the same time, you can also just actively downgrade depending on the hostage you rescue. I go for every hostage more or less along the way anyway, but there's a lot of question in my head as to whether or not it is actually like a actual weapon upgrade system, or it's, hey, go here for the chain whip, it's super useful. Or, hey, go here for the pistol long-range weapon, it's super busted. Because it does a lot of damage and is super fast. Mind you, I say a lot of damage as if enemies in this game have a lot of HP. By and large, every enemy in this game, outside of boss fights, goes down in one shot. There's maybe only 1 or 2 in the game, period, that take 2 or more. Maybe 3. From memory, at least. My memory is a little faded on this one at this point, honestly. Because, usually the way I like to do LP recordings is record the entire game, then do the videos. I have recorded every Shinobi game I'm going to do for this at this point, so my memory might get a little bit mixed as to which one's which and what works with what in which game. So I'm gonna apologize for that ahead of time. Now, before I leap into the manual, I should note, we can actually progress into the next part of the stage right now, and in it, there's gonna be some water on the bottom of the floor. In most games of this type, that would be instant kill. It's just another floor here for some reason, despite enemies jumping out of the water in a way that would make you think it would be instant kill. It plays with my head. I don't like it. Either way, time for the manual. Shinobi, the name means stealth. It's one of the qualities you have learned in a lifetime of training and discipline passed on in your family from father to son over the decades. Ninjutsu, you are Joe Musashi, the master ninja. Your hands and feet are lethal. With shuriken, sword, nunchaku, and other weapons, you are virtually unstoppable. You're also a deep cover agent for the government, called on when the fate of the nations is at stake. This time you must battle the Ring of Five, a terrorist network led by 5 evil ninjas with powers as strong as your own. The Ring of Five has kidnapped the children of the world's leaders, hey, they are kids, and are holding them hostage in different locations around the world. Each is guarded by karate thugs, deadly mercenaries, and the meanest martial artists in the world. You have 5 missions. In each you must rescue the hostages, take out the Ring of Five's henchmen, and defeat a leader of the Ring of Five. They have might on their side. But prove your skill with the shuriken. You will earn ninja magic to aid you. Good luck. This will be your toughest assignment ever. I mean, technically, since this is the first Shinobi game in the series, it is therefore the toughest Shinobi game in the series until the second game came out. So that's not entirely inaccurate. Now, you saw it a little bit right there, but the platforming in Shinobi 1 is a little awkward, despite the control being really good for a platformer of this era. Because compared to, say, Castlevania, when you make a jump in this game, you're not dedicated to the jump's arc. You can reverse your direction at any points and return to where you jumped from. The problem is, the jump arc itself isn't the best, and some of the jumps they require you to make are pretty tight due to that arc. Thankfully, only really 2 of those in the game are lethal out of maybe the 6 that come to mind as tricky. With that said, those 2 can mess you up bad. Either way, it's time for the next boss fight, Black Turtle. We need to hit that little weird yellow point on the helicopter, but the boss itself doesn't directly attack you. Wait, actually, technically it does. It's got 2 attacks, dropping aerial ninjas on you who can really crowd you in the back if you don't take them out quickly enough. And occasionally, it'll fire 2 missiles out that you have to try and jump over, I think. Honestly, most of the boss fights in this game, I feel a legitimate strategy for at least the first 3 is to just tank a hit every now and then if it means getting more damage across. With that, we're on to stage 3, Target Mandara. This is my least favorite stage in the game. By and large, mostly just due to the boss fight, although for some reason, This weird coral mountain area reminds me a lot of the Forgotten Capital from Final Fantasy VII. Like, I don't know why, but every time I've gotten to this stage, it's just what immediately comes to mind. We do have one of the more annoying enemy types in the game here, though. Duke Nukem with a rocket launcher. Their arc with their rocket launcher, when they shoot it up, is surprisingly hard to avoid due to the size of Joe's sprite. Thankfully, though, again, they die in one shot. There are times like this, though, they really try to trap you with their enemy placements. Now, I mentioned all of the ninja magic, like the ninjutsu earlier, the magic spells you can get through this, the bonus stages. There are, honestly, several varieties in the game, and I called them a generic screen nuke earlier. That's technically only true with technically three of them. There's a binding magic, which kind of looks like a snake coil, which will freeze the movements of every enemy on screen. There's the invisibility magic, which, when you use it, Musashi will flicker on and off, more or less meaning you're invincible for a short time. There's the 8 hands magic, which looks kind of like a running ninja. In that one, Joe releases like 8 shadow clones of himself that go all over the screen, and, well, that's the screen nuke. There's the flying squirrel magic, according to the manual at least, which kind of looks like a sheet over nothing, which allows you to fly for a short period of time. This would be potentially more broken if it showed up more often, because I think you only get specific magics from specific bonus stages. There's the lightning magic, which is screen nuke, and there's a tornado magic, which, by and large, screen nuke, if it works like one does in one of the later games, what that technically does is turn Joe into a tornado you can move around to just mow through enemies. If it's another screen nuke, though, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, because right now I have the lightning one. The way you use the magic, by the way, I forget if I already mentioned this or not. You hold, I think, A for a short, or button 2 for a short time, and then you press B. Or is it hold button 1 for a short time and then press A? Oh no, press and hold button 2, then press 1. You'll know you're in the ninjutsu use mode, so to speak, when Musashi does a pose and faces the camera. If you press button 1 at that point, you will then use the ninjutsu, and then you're on your way. Ooh, the chain whip. This is one of my favorite weapons in the game, because out of all of the short-range weapons, it easily has the longest range. And when a short-range weapon still has a long range, you know the weapon's good. Unless its damage is just low, depending on the action game you're playing. Usually they balance those out with being super fast, but with low individual damage. Per hit, at least. Now, as for my start with the Shinobi series, I got into it during my earliest phases of emulation back in the day, because I liked playing a lot of Sonic games on Kega Fusion at the time, and I decided to play Shinobi 3 because I saw it and it looked like Ninja Gaiden. I knew I liked Ninja Gaiden by that point. And by and large, that's kind of what this series was. It was Sega's Ninja Gaiden by and large, despite, I think, this coming out before Ninja Gaiden 1? I think? Actually, what did come out first? Ninja Gaiden, series of video games by Tecmo, blah, 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 blah. Arcade game for Ninja Gaiden was released in '88. Shinobi 1 might be first. Because this may have been 87. Yep, 87. So Ninja Gaiden came out a year later. So Ninja Gaiden was just Nintendo/Tecmo's Shinobi, so to speak, rather. Though, by and large, given that Ninja Gaiden was probably the more successful series in its home console releases, it's questionable who won that in that regard. Especially considering Ninja Gaiden had kind of a life after, like, the N64 era, thanks to those 3 remakes. And while Shinobi had that a little bit as well, thanks to Shinobi, Nightshade, and what was the third? What was the one on the 3DS called? I think it was just called Shinobi 3D. Ninja Gaiden definitely got more ports and praise in that era. Can't help but wonder what they would do if they decided to make a new one of either of those series, though. Would they go for, like, more of a Ninja Gaiden 3D action style again, or would they go for more of a platformer style? Questions for later. Either way, welcome to Boss 3, Mandara. This first phase sucks because you need to destroy 12 Mandara statues, each one taking 4 hits. You need to get close to them to take them out quickly, but not so close as to the point they'll scroll into you. Thing is, you might see that giant lightning bolt in the back. While the Mandara statues themselves, if they touch you, are an instant kill. If they touch you and you get knocked back into that and your invincibility frames wear off, that lightning bolt is instant kill. The timing here is absurdly strict, and that's only phase 1. Phase 2, though, is thankfully pretty easy. You gotta shoot the giant head on the wall. It'll shoot out projectiles at 2 altitudes, high or low. Stand under the high one because it'll bounce over you, but jump over the low one because it'll bounce under you into your shins. Otherwise, just jump and shoot when it's low enough, and that'll go down eventually. Honestly, phase 2 is a much easier fight than phase 1. It makes me wonder if that's why phase 1 exists at all, barring it being in the arcade game, of course. That's stage 3 of 5 done. Time for stage 4. Oh god, my greatest nemesis. Lobster. That joke only makes sense to a few people. For context, I'm allergic to shellfish, despite me loving shrimp. And calamari, which is considered a shellfish food group thing for oil reasons, I think. I don't know. Honestly, by and large, partially due to the health bar existing, Shinobi 1 I would hesitate to call a hard game. It has hard moments, particularly the previous boss fight, of course. But as long as you take your time and let your enemies attack and then attack them as a response, you shouldn't have many problems at all with most of the Shinobi games, honestly. I'd say only Shadow Dancer on Genesis is endgame. Shinobi 3, Shinobi Legions, and maybe one other game are actively hard and aggressive against you in such a way that even the patience game makes the game super hard. Because by and large, these games definitely have their difficulties, or in at least a few stages cases of extreme tedium. I'm looking at a certain Game Gear title in particular. Yeah, we're doing those too. Because it's always weird when a game has multiple versions for me across different platforms that are very different games. Like if I ever, for instance, decide to tackle more Disney games from the Super Nintendo Genesis era, I would probably tackle both versions of Aladdin separately because they're such radically different games. Because of that, I'm doing basically both versions of Shadow Dancer for this. Albeit, in certain cases, I could be considered doing the worst version, because despite me getting along in emulation stuff nowadays, thanks to my newer laptop at this point, arcade games are still beyond me, less because MAME is hard to work with. That was the pose, by the way, right there that activates Ninjutsu. You can even see I tried to activate it there on the top. It's more so just a factor of I don't know how to even begin approaching getting everything to work right. I know it would work, I just don't know how to get it to work right. This is one of the jumps that really sucks, by the way. Woo! Oh boy. That was close. Another similarity between this and Ninja Gaiden, admittedly, is the stages are inconsistent in length, not only from one game to another, but within the game themselves. Because whether or not a stage has 2 sections, 5 sections, 7 in at least one case in Shinobi 3, if memory serves, entirely just depends on what the designers wanted to do with that stage. And usually each unique section has something new going for it, some new mechanic or hazard to watch out for. But by and large, because Shinobi 1 is so bare bones, the most it does is, hey, you want some more bottomless pits? You want some weird gremlin-looking dudes that are basically flea men? God, I do not like that thing's face when it jumps. And part of that, admittedly, is on the case of me playing it on the Master System. Because the Master System was a very weak console. If I'm recalling correctly, it only had 2 layers to work with. The sprite layer and the background layer, whereas I think even the NES had like 4 layers, I want to say. I'm going to look that up just to make sure. And it is interesting to me in a way how the NES and the Master System mirrored each other, because I think if I'm recalling correctly, the Master System could flip background tile stuff, no problem, but it couldn't flip sprites without having a separate sprite for it. Whereas the NES, if memory serves, was the exact opposite. It could flip sprites, no problem, so you only needed, like, a sprite of a character facing left, and you'd automatically have one of them facing right, unless you wanted to make a separate one in the case, like, maybe they had an eye patch on one eye, but not many games decide to do that. Either way, this is Lobster. Lobster's arguably the most annoying boss in the game outside of Mandara, because you can only damage him similarly to Keno by hitting him in the head, but unlike Keno, Lobster is only available to be damaged when he's actively attacking you, and his only attack is a super short-range swipe. So you need to do a very quick bait and switch by moving out of the way and jumping and shooting him in the face, and that is surprisingly tricky to do, mostly because his attack animation is so short, meaning his invulnerability comes back so quick, but also because the added tension of that time limit means you're more likely to mess up your inputs and then eat up your attack or miss completely. It's a mess. While Mandara is definitely the more dangerous fight, Lobster is a more annoying fight. With that said, we're already on to the final stage against the Masked Ninja. I should note, the game actively doesn't have an ending in the Master System version, so when we beat the final boss, it's just gonna say game over and boot you back to the title screen. In the case you're playing along and want an ending, look up the ending to the arcade game, because it does actively have a little text scroll. And because of that, I might as well use this chance to go over my thoughts of the game. Shinobi 1 is bare, as most first games in the series are. But I think even compared to other first games in the series, this is woefully bare. And that's partially because it is a Master System game, and it was an arcade game in '87. Even the best arcade games at that point didn't have too much going on. If I were to compare it to a game contemporary to it around the same era, not a contemporary, equivalent to it from the same era. What was the game on NES and arcade? Legend of Kage, I think? It's very similar to that. It just has a much better progression system, be it in terms of power-ups or its stage count. If you want to play Shinobi 1, you're in luck, because technically speaking, it's on a lot of things, because it's on arcades, Amiga, Amstrad, CPC, Atari ST, Commodore 64, IBM PC, Master System, MSX, NES, PC Engine, PlayStation 3, ZX Spectrum, Wii, Arcade, and Xbox 360. Whew. And I think, I want to say maybe the arcade version may have been ported to Sega Ages at one point on Switch. And if there's a port to recommend to that, I guess in terms of gameplay, while I don't like the one-hit wonder nature of it, it would be the arcade version, so check out Shinobi 1 on Switch. Personally speaking, I'd say you're better off looking into literally any other Shinobi game except maybe the Master System version of Shadow Dancer, which is what's going to be up next, and definitely not the Cyber Shinobi on Master System, because that's probably the worst game of the entire series. More on that later. Alright, this is actively the last combat screen in the game, and it's honestly still easier than some of the ones in Stage 4. Because thanks to the double-layered system returning from even Stage 1, there's very few enemies that are actively attacking you at one time. So as long as you, say, scum the layer jumping, attack once and then jump back down, or up should the case be, you're in really good shape. That was loud, even my ears. So yeah, that's the lightning thing. There's not much use using ninjutsu in boss fights from memory. I don't think bosses are ever affected by them in Shinobi 1. Later games, that's not so much the case, thankfully. But in this game, no, I believe ninjutsu doesn't affect boss fights at all. Alright, with that though, time for the final boss against the Masked Ninja. And the final boss is easily the most complex because it has multiple phases depending on how much HP you've taken out. At the start, it's going to be leaping around with a lightning barrier around, but every time it jumps, it'll drop periodically to try and do an attack. So just spam that attack button whenever you're near it, and then they'll move on to phase 2, where it becomes a tornado that spins around shooting wind blades at you. If you are very quick about timing your close range attacks, you can completely phase through the wind blades not taking a hit, though. Phase 3, it jumps around and tries to throw shurikens at you, I believe. And phase 4, it just runs up and decks you in the goddamn face. I appreciate the bluntness. It's complex compared to every boss in the game, don't get me wrong. But it's not hard, I'd say. It can bring the damage, roughly 2 damage per hit. But as you can see, we're done. That's Shinobi 1. We get our mission complete screen, and then it's just going to go to the same game over screen you get when you get a game over. But with that, I'm going to need to end this game off here, obviously. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great night. Take care. Been a while since we did a one-off LP. No, actually, no, it wasn't, because Super C wasn't too long ago, was it? Either way, and I'll see you guys in the next Shinobi game. See you guys then.